make soap the way that we make soap in today's time. But as I go along, I'm going to explain the way that the frontiersmen may have made their soap. The first thing to know about soap making are the ingredients. It requires lye and a fat of some sort, any kind of fat. The lye is made from ash and rainwater, or soft water. Any kind of soft water, rainwater is the best. Potash is from a hardwood, and hardwood makes the very best lye. In the frontier days, they would leach their own lye in a leaching apparatus similar to this one over here, or they would leach it in an apparatus like this. This represents a bottomless barrel. The barrel would have no bottom in it. They would put gravel in the bottom, a layer of hay. The gravel would catch the large debris, and the hay would catch the smaller debris. Then when they put in their potash straight out of their fireplace or their campfire, then they would pour rainwater over it. That could take anywhere from 3 days to a week for this water to leach all the way down. Every couple of hours they would add a little more water and a little more water so they didn't force it through the ash, and it would go through very slowly to make a stronger lye. My little leaching apparatus here is actually making lye, and I'll show you how. The lye would come out a brown liquid like this one. It looks kind of like a very weak coffee. And I have some litmus paper here that will show us how alkaline my lye is. So the litmus paper has no color, or very light colors if you just were to put it in water. But if you put it in my lye, you can see it's quite alkaline. So I am making lye. If I wanted to make soap with my lye, what I would have to do is reduce it to make it stronger, because right now it's weak. I'd have to reduce it by either boiling it or letting the extra water evaporate out of it to the point where the viscosity of the lye, this is a lye that I would use to make soap with right here. This is the strength that I would use. And what they would do in the frontier days is they would float an egg in it to see if their lye was strong enough. Today, I use a lye calculator to make sure that my lye is the right strength for the oils that I'm using. But this is the only method that they would have had, is to just see if their lye was strong enough, or if the buoyancy would be such that the egg would barely show up the top. Then they knew they had lye that would make soap. Now back, as far as the legends of soap, welcome, come on in if you'd like. And there's a legend of soap making. Probably every culture has a legend of soap making, of who invented or discovered soap. One of those legends is Sopa Hill in Rome. The Romans used to, they used to slaughter animals at a sacrificial altar on top of a hill. And that was a gift to their gods. So they had their altar up there, they had a burning fire. The fire presented the ash that would be necessary to make the lye. They had animals on the fire with fat draining off of those animals, which provided the fat, which would make the soap. So when it would rain, the rain provided the soft water, hitting the ash and the fat, rolling down the hill into the river below. When the women would come to wash at the river, they would notice that their clothing would be cleaner, get cleaner easier. So that's one legend of how soap was discovered. Like I said, every culture has their idea that maybe they did it, but that's what the Romans think. Going on forward to the frontier days, what they would have to do after they've made their lye, which could be, like I said, a week process of doing that, and they've got their lye, it floated in an egg, they would have to render fat from their livestock. in the frontier days, the soaping was done once or twice a year, and it was always done at the same time they did their butchery, because the animal fat was readily available at that point in time. So they would take their animal fat, put it in a large kettle outside on an open fire, along with water. They would add water to it, and they would boil it until all of the fat was floating on the top. So at the end of the day, once they boiled this, which is called rendering the fat out of the animals, they would have a layer of fat floating on the top. The second layer would be a watery solution, and at the bottom would be the meat scraps that would have been originally put in and the fat rendered from it. So then some of the water at that point would have been evaporated out through the boiling process. They would then put cold water in it to cool it down. The next day, when they come back, they would have their clean fat on top. They would scoop it off, put it in another pot over another open fire, and add their lye solution to it. They would use a paddle and stir this solution all day long, 8 to 10 hours all day, keeping it boiling. And the boiling process is very important to soap making. Now today, we're going to use store-bought lard and store-bought lye. What I've done here is I've mixed lye and water, distilled water, in order to make my lye solution instead of leaching it. And for the boiling process, I'm going to simulate the boiling process with a mixer. This mixer spins around and around, and the boiling would be spinning that are moving those molecules around and around. The fat that they use is a fatty acid, and the lye that they use is an alkaline, and the same that we're using today. So when you have your fatty acid molecule and your alkaline molecule, the boiling will beat those molecules together and cause a chemical reaction called saponification. The saponification is the chemical creates a separate third chemical compound, which is sodium salt, which sodium salt is soap. So that's what we're going to do here today. We've got all of our ingredients laid out, and we're going to make that soap. Now you'll notice when I start to blend the lye or the alkaline into the fat or the fatty acid, it will begin to change colors. It'll immediately start to go opaque. And as I blend it more, it's going to be even more opaque, and it's going to get thicker. That opaque look is the beginning process of saponification. So I'm going to go ahead and start that now, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It will get thicker and thicker, and as it gets thicker, it will go into trace, what we call trace in the soaping world. And all trace is, let me demonstrate that first. All trace is to show that the soap is thickening up. And it's like if you had a bowl full of pancake batter, and you put your spoon in it, and you pulled your spoon across it, that trail it would leave, that's trace. That would be a medium trace as far as soaping is concerned. The way that they knew in the frontier days is they would float a potato in it. If the potato, if it was buoyant enough to float the potato, then they knew that it was thick enough to pour and make soap. Now, if there was a second test that they done, they would do the potato test, make sure it was thick enough, but also there was the concern of too much alkaline in their fatty acid. So if there was too much alkaline in their fatty acid, it would burn their skin, chemical burn. So they would do what they would call a zap test. After they had stirred it all day and they thought it was close, the potato floated, they would take their paddle out, put their finger to it, and touch it to their tongue. If it stung their tongue, they would know they needed to cook it more, because every molecule of fatty acid had not found a molecule of alkaline, and that's the reason it was burning their tongue. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and watch the saponification process now. As I pour it in, you'll see it turn white, a whiter color. And then as I beat it, you'll see it getting even more white. And all of the molecules are beginning to saponify now, and it will get thicker as we go on. Right now it's still about the same thickness as it was when I put them together. But as I beat and as it would boil, it would get thicker and thicker. The process we're doing here today is going to take 5 minutes at the most for it to come to full trace. In the frontier days, it would take, like I said, 8 to 10 hours for it to get to this point. At the end of the process, today we put our fragrance, we want to put colors and fragrances in, we would put it at the end of trace when it was thick. In that time, if they bothered at all, which most of the time they wouldn't because they didn't have the resources and it just wasn't logical to worry about the smell, they were interested in the soap cleaning, they might put an herb like rosemary or even fennel, smells pretty good, in their soap after they had boiled it and poured it right before they were ready to put it into their molds. And this is the soap that we had made along the way. You can tell the past 2 days we've been making soap. This is very hard. All of this is very hard. This is harder than this. And every day that comes along it's going to get a little bit harder. And it'll take this soap right here a couple of hours to firm up. In a couple of days we'll cut the soap and then we will have to cure it. In the frontier days when they boiled, any hot process soap can be used immediately because remember that the boiling process is causing those molecules and the heating process is helping it to go through a gel stage. What we're doing here is a cold process. It will have to cure for 2 weeks before you're out of the risk, at least 2 weeks before you're out of the risk of it having a chemical burn. And you can see it's getting thicker. Not quite ready to pour, but it's getting thicker. Y'all have any questions? No? Still getting even thicker. Now, because I've done it for so long, do you have a question, darling? No? Or you're showing me your candy? Oh, and your letter. That's wonderful. And I think it's just about ready. It's at a medium trace now. It's thicker. As I pour it into the mold, you'll be able to see just how thick it is. It's like a pudding right before, if you cook the pudding, right before you pour it in. This is how thick it's going to be. That's just about what it should look like. And in 2 weeks, this would be soap that you could use. It's soap right now, but you could use it safely in a couple of weeks. Okay, any questions?
How would they get it out?
Well, in the frontier days, they would not use a plastic container like this. They would use a wooden container that would come apart. It would be jointed like a wooden box so that they could tear it apart without, because this soap is going to